look, there are emerging markets that will be slammed because investors will put outflows. They'll say, look, if Donald Trump puts some of his policies in place, I want to be in the U.S., not emerging markets.
I think that's a good point. I think that's the thinking that you have, and that's a real problem going forward. But the real challenge, I think, will be interest rates. I believe Trump wants higher interest rates because the people who elected him fell up on getting low interest in their bank savings. And, of course, for the fixed income market in emerging markets, that's not good because money will go back into the U.S. But it will be temporary. As regards to the equity, that's a different story. I believe that equities in emerging markets will do fine because the U.S. economy will be doing fine, and the U.S. administration will take a very practical approach in their negotiations with Mexico, with China, with all these other countries.
Right, but Mark, what about trade?
It'll be a bilateral.
Trade is the one sticking point, right? A lot of these exports from emerging markets will be weakened, and we saw even today, we saw yesterday, central banks from India to Indonesia stepping in to stabilize their currencies.
That's no question. That's a good point. But what will happen, I believe, is that these emerging markets like China, India, and others will depend more and more on their domestic market, not on export markets. Commodities, of course, I believe will continue to rise, will recover, which will be good for some emerging markets, not all. But I believe from a point of view of the administration's stance in the U.S., it'll be more practicality rather than a blanket situation with exports and imports.
All right, but do you assume that TTIP is dead in the water? And actually, do you assume that overall free trade is going to be much more complicated?
Definitely, it will be much more complicated. Multilateral agreements will go out the door. It'll be more bilateral agreements. And I believe it will be fine. Trump is a negotiator. He's a businessman. And he'll reach agreements with these countries.
Dr. Mobius, emerging markets coming out of the 2008 crisis based in U.S. dollars have been in nothing but a flat to bear market. Bring up the chart, if you would, Anthony, and you can see here the arc of disappointment of emerging markets, again, not based in their own currencies, but based in U.S. dollars. Dr. Mobius, when I look at that, I want you to state the case for EM investment, or does even Mark Mobius have to move to the emerging market known as the United States of America?
Well, if you look at the last 3 years, there's no question that emerging markets have underperformed. But if you look at it from January of this year to now, you'll see that emerging markets have outperformed the U.S. market. I believe it will continue for very good reasons. First, population structure in these countries is younger population. Great growth in consumerism. Right. Secondly, internet is having an incredible impact. Transfer of technology is very, very big now. Third, emerging markets are growing at double the rate of that of the United States and Europe.
Right. Well, Dr. Mobius.
And fourthly, I believe you're going to get reform in these countries.
Okay, I agree with everything you've said, but this is absolutely critical. If we have a presumed currency war within the macroeconomics of the global economy, does Mark Mobius have to own emerging markets always hedged against currency depreciation? Help Global Wall Street this morning. Do they need to affect every trade with a currency hedge?
In some cases, that will be necessary. Some currencies are going to continue to get weaker. There's no question about that. But remember, there are many currencies in the emerging markets world that are getting stronger against the U.S. dollar, and I believe will stabilize now at these levels.
Right, but Mark, you seem to be talking in your book. I mean, this cannot be good news. Talk to me about the countries that are really going to suffer if the policies that we think Donald Trump will push through will become reality.
I frankly can't think of any countries that will really suffer badly as a result of his policies. And the proof is in the pudding. It will really depend on what kind of negotiations take place. I believe, let's take Mexico, for example. If you look at the situation in Mexico, it looks dire. Trump is going to build a wall. There's going to be restrictions. I don't think these things are going to come to pass. I believe at the end of the day, he'll make an agreement with Mexico, which will be mutually beneficial to both countries.
Mark, I want to bring up Mexican peso again. I showed this chart earlier in the hour. Mark, we're almost out to 3 standard deviations depreciation on the latest run-up of Mexico back a year and a half. Is there an ability here for emerging market currencies and Mexico as an N11 nation where it truly unravels based on naive policies by Republicans in Washington?
I believe that you can see the Mexican peso as a great opportunity because the volatility is incredible. And if you can catch it at a low level, you could probably make a lot of money just speculating on the currency. But okay, let's say the Mexican peso gets very weak. Exports will do very well. And not only to the U.S., but to other countries. And I believe exports to the U.S. are not going to stop. They're going to continue.
Okay, Mark, how much more
So
volatility?
again, I think we have to look at what the policies are.
Right, let's look at the policies. Let's wait for the details. But is it a given that actually we're going to see a lot more volatility from now onwards, not only in equities overall, not only in currencies, but especially in emerging markets?
I think you have to differentiate between fixed income and equities. My view is that equities in emerging markets have tremendous opportunities now. They're much cheaper than the U.S. market. And I mentioned the growth and all the other factors that are very important to see good results with emerging market equities.